Talk to me about trying to define, to explain, to actually say, this is what Lune Plage is. These are the people that come here and this is what it means.
Well, you may have seen Lune Plage sort of surface on, there's been a few sort of quote unquote reporting trips that sort of Tory frontbenchers have taken to France. And I think Robert Jenrick rocked up there for a small while.
90 minutes, didn't see a white face the whole time he was there. Yeah.
But so you may have seen it on things like that. And I will say, to give a bit of context on what this place is, so after the jungle was dismantled almost 10 years ago, the French put into place this policy called zero fixation, which is basically a policy to try and make sure nothing like the jungle could ever come back. It's sort of a policy. The policy sort of works on sort of two levels. One, it sort of keeps migrants moving by sort of dismantling their tents in what they call evictions, which are basically just sort of seizures of their stuff, usually very early in the morning.
And we should be clear as well, that's not just the tents, right? It's what's inside them. So that can mean
sometimes
passport, phones, medicine.
Yeah. If you want to imagine you're living in a tent in the Calais area and you leave to go collect food and you come back and your tent is gone, you may have left your passport in there or something like that. So migrants have to make a decision whether or not to dismantle their entire tent and bring all their stuff with them to go get food. There's simple, pragmatic decisions like that can destroy your life if you get them wrong.
Yeah.
So they enacted this policy that sort of turned the migrants, instead of being settled in this place, which was very unruly and difficult to control, and you had all sorts of problems involved in it. They sort of became these sort of vagabonds that sort of moved along the coastline, and they've sort of seem to have collected in sort of two main areas. There's the migrants that live in the Calais area itself, and they sort of live essentially like homeless people, maybe with a added police harassment, I'd say, or police involvement in their lives. That's a very difficult existence, but I think it sort of pales in comparison to the sort of other major collectivization of these migrants, which is in a place called Lune Plage. Now, Lune Plage is the name of a sort of hamlet nearby. It's basically just an area of sort of eerie woodland between a Total refinery and a big A road.
Well, the other thing about Lune Plage as well was when you first arrive, you arrive at like a distribution point, which is where the Red Cross go there, but also loads of French like local NGOs go there and deliver aid, provide chargers. And when you see it, it actually looks quite small at first, but then if you keep walking in different directions, you stumble upon another circle of tents, another circle of tents, another circle of tents, and they're all sort of hidden within, like, behind different layers of woodland. And so it's got this really eerie quality. And the other thing is that, and I guess this is quite logical, is people tend to congregate by demographic group, by common language.
So it'll be like, the Sudanese people are over here, the Eritrean people are over here, the Afghans are down there.
Yeah, that seems to be how things map out when you arrive. But yeah, Lune Plage was, you kept walking, you kept on finding more and more and more and more. And this sounds like a very strange thing to say, but like the tents aside, the place was quite a beautiful bit of countryside, and so you were kind of, as you were going through it, there were bits where like the sunlight would like break in between like the trees and it would look beautiful, and then you would turn and see complete destitution, and it had that horrible sort of
eerie familiarity.
Yeah.
When I've been there a couple of years ago now, it was the thing that struck me was like, first of all, the smell of kind of fuel burning combined with like, it should be like, there's no plumbing, there's no showers, the smell of excrement.
I've never seen anything quite as terrible as Lune Plage. It's a horrible place. There's no showers, there's no toilets, there's no real basic infrastructure at all.
No, not really.
There was one migrant I talked to called Hope, who was a Ethiopian migrant. She'd moved to Sweden first and lived a sort of moderately suburban life with her son in Sweden, and then lost her work permit and had to leave, and ended up pretty quickly in Lune Plage with her son, and she just burst into tears when she was recalling this experience, because she'd sort of gone from, not a affluent life, but a fairly comfortable life, to living in a tent surrounded by rats and inhuman feces and sort of strewn litter, and it's it's a really, really difficult place for people to live. And if you go there for even, I'd say about a couple of hours, you can understand people's desperation in trying to leave it.
You mentioned Hope, you mentioned her son, but in a way, those two, like an infant child and a woman, those aren't the typical characters you find in Loon Plage, is it?
No, generally. So, for example, you do find every age group, but I would say that it does tend to be young men, and I'd say that if I was going to pick an age range, it would be between 16 to 23 was a big group.
Why do you think that is?
Well, most of these are premarital aged men, and I'd say the main. I'll give you the list of the main countries. We've had Sudan, Syria, Afghanistan, Kurdish, Iranian, and Eritrean were the five of the. I'm not saying they were the most common, but five of like the common groups. Most of them spoke some basic level of English, but you couldn't really have like a deep conversation, but you could have a very, very functional conversation with them.
Because you speak Arabic as well.
Yeah, which helped. It helped in that part, I think, like at least winning trust. And I would say that the more that maybe this is a normal thing, or maybe it was to do particularly with the story, but the more you get to know people and you interview them, went to go see people multiple times, the more you start seeing your own society like looking back at you. I didn't feel that, for the most part, the people there were actually that much different from like a sample of 16 to 23-year-old young men that we would get in our society. You know, take the pub away and like add like things which are more culturally common in their societies, and you'd get a similar setup. And I think some of the things that we kind of talked about this briefly in the piece, that maybe the left and the right both get wrong on this issue, is that, you know, the right, they're all sort of like criminals and sex offenders,
fighting
and the left,
age men.
Yeah, and the left, it's all, you know, well, the left isn't wrong on this issue. There's definitely a sort of like extreme victim, worthy victim, which is true, but for the most part, often they were just like lads, like how the lads are here. And most of the time when they want to have conversations with you, they want to just have jokes. I really felt that. And of course, they do carry immense amount of trauma, which most of them are happy to speak about, but they also just want a bit of jokes and good time in their life too.
You're talking about in the piece, there's a scene you describe where one of the French aid organisations, they kind of, you know, tea, coffee, charging, and there's a football.
Yeah.
And the young guy, they basically start playing keepy uppies, and then the kids next to them, they've got a game that they start playing as well.
They do have a game. They check each other's passports, which is profoundly bleak to think about. But what I will say about that space, though, it's called the group that organised it is called Secours Catholique, and that sort of space is this sort of actually this amazing place. It's one of the few joyous moments we had in the whole trip.
Tell me about the less joyous component. We've alluded to it a couple of times, the danger, the criminality.
We for 2 days went with a French NGO where we basically, me and Miles, got in the back of the car and drove around with them, and their job was to document police activity and interactions with displaced people, with migrants. So the idea would be that if there was ever a legal case, these people would be represented through their documentation. And we went one day when there was a huge like police eviction. And if you just look at the camp, there's an east side and a west side. There's a generalisation, but sort of how we pictured it in our head. The east side was bad. I mean, in the sense that there was extreme destitution, poverty, disease, people were living terribly. But for the most part, kind of, I didn't feel like super in danger. And then there was this other part of the camp that the NGO workers, even a lot of them are told not to go to. And the way that the police eviction happened was that it cut us off. And so the only way that we could get back to the distribution point was to go through the red zone, yeah, if we're going to call it that. And then we and Miles were thinking, well, you know, let's just do it anyway. And then we crossed this sort of bridge made from mesh it was like shopping trolleys stamped down into a thin line. And we get there and there's just two guys, one of them with like, they're standing there like in front of us, get really agitated, like, what are you doing here? I mean, it's kind of like an unofficial checkpoint.
There was one guy who sort of sat in a chair, sort of going through his phone, and sort of looked up and was like, what are you guys doing here? And then almost as soon as he said that, he kind of beckoned over someone. And
and then got right up, like very, very aggressive. It was the first time I really saw like stark aggression there.
let's talk about push factors before we talk about pull factors. You in the piece, you talk through a couple of characters, the things that happen to them. People have been tortured. People are fleeing political persecution. It's difficult to obviously identify common themes. People experience different stuff, but what did you understand to be some of the reasons people felt they were being pushed towards England?
Of all the people we spoke to, I think only one you could reasonably say was looking for, had their main motivation being economic.
Yeah.
The rest, I don't know, people are cynical, but people might cynically say, oh, they're lying to you or whatever. But it's hard to lie about a toe that you're missing, or I'm just saying.
Or there is no toe. There is no toe on my foot.
Or someone pulling up their stomach and having like a botched job operation on their liver where they've been shot, and
he had DVDs with him.
He had DVDs that had recorded his liver operation, and the operation hadn't been a complete success.
Still had some bullet lodged in his liver,
and he was planning to take the DVDs to the NHS to show them so they could reoperate and remove the rest of the bullet. And also,
I think we can safely say that's not an economic migrant. But
yeah, well,
this is the line in the piece, right? Well, I'll read a section of it. Please. Right. Of everyone we spoke to, only one stated that he'd left because of the job market. The rest recalled genocidal militias, airstrikes, repressive regimes, religious persecution, torture, mutilation, and death. But the economic migrant's critique obscures the obvious reality that a person can be both in need of work and fleeing for their life. This is true of Mahir, who wants to become a nurse, and Mahmoud, the Palestinian, who wants to become a lawyer. Safety and prosperity are not mutually exclusive.
Like, migration is not an ideological choice. It's a series of practical choices driven by some mode of desperation, usually. People don't think about it like, I'm going to get to the UK and then I'm going to start this thing and I'm going to have this ambition in the UK. A lot of the time it's just, well, I'm in Lune Plage, like I have to get out of here.
The specifics, like there's two routes really, isn't there? There's the boat crossing and then there's the lorries, right? And there's different prices attached to either of those things. The lorries, safer, slightly more reliable, and therefore more expensive.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to get a place on a boat?
A boat, well, it varies, but then from the general average, when people are saying somewhere between £1,000 to £2,000, but also the price depends upon how many attempts you get. So I think, and again, this varied, and the more that you paid, the more attempts you get, or you maybe got an infinite number of attempts. But then some Sudanese people were also saying that, Sudanese would often arrive there, some of the poorest. And so there would be maybe special deals done for them, considering their situation. So it was a proper market. People were getting deals in the same way that you would get deals in a market on Chapel Road. It was operating like that. So
it's that extensive that there's actually sort of competition, pricing, etc. taking place.
As far as we could tell,
yeah. And then we didn't get like an average fee, but lorries or getting in the back of a container of a lorry was a more desirable route. I mean, in that. Yeah, you're not out on a boat in the Channel.
Yeah. Also, I think what else is striking is how many times people tried to cross the Channel. I don't think people are aware of this. I'd say it would have been an average of about 4 times. Wow. I'd say, based on all the interviews we've done, which were quite thorough and extensive. So I'd say we interviewed about upwards of 24 people about this.
And that could be any number of things: the police disrupting it, a boat, the engine cuts out, they get towed back by the coast. Like, it could be anything, right?
There's this one guy, Mahir, who is a wonderful guy. The sort of Syrian lad who's quite young, sort of, who'd learnt, English by watching TV shows on his phone, wanted to be a nurse. He tried 9 times, Like, I just want people at home to just imagine doing that 9 times. It's an incredibly traumatic thing to do. Hope, for example, the Ethiopian woman I was talking about, who was trying to get to the UK with her son and speaks perfect English, the last time she tried, she could see the white cliffs, looming over her, and the boat ran out of fuel, which happens a lot, and then the French Coast Guard towed her back to Lune Plage, and after that she just stopped trying because she's now trying to claim asylum. She tried to do the 1 in 1 out scheme, which we'll discuss later, and she's now trying to claim asylum in France. But it's that thing, the graveyard of dreams. It's this It's where you just bury them over and over again. People who've buried their ambitions and dreams, and it's rough.
There was an interesting, again, we didn't get this in the story, but I spoke to this Sudanese guy who was in an asylum hotel in the UK. One of the things we did for this reporting is we reported a lot of with displaced people, migrants there, but then actually did reporting people who had actually arrived in the UK but were in migrant hotels.
Yeah.
And he gave a really interesting one. I was like, well, so what? He was from Niala, South Darfur. And I was like, well, why did you come to the UK? What was that? And he was like, I arrived in Italy. And then I get off in Italy and I've just got no idea what I'm meant to do. I don't understand the system. He's like, I've never left Darfur before. I arrive in Italy and I just don't understand. And so I just keep going. I get to France. I don't really understand how things work, but I've got a mate in Lune Plage, Calais. I can't remember which one. And then I get to the UK, I come and I arrive on a boat, I'm met by the British authorities, and for the first time I've got clarity in like what I need to do to get to the next place, like on my asylum case. And I thought, God, and then one of the things that we were thinking afterwards, and I don't want to like be like someone who uses this like reportership to suggest policy, but I felt like a standardized like system would be one of the things that is crying out in Europe, where there's just like a clear system where when people arrive, they get given everything explained to them in their native tongue.
I think there's a parallel between, the other thing is that there's a parallel between the migrants' assumptions about the UK and the UK's assumptions about the migrants, you know? So like a lot of them think about Britain as this land of integration and minimal racism, which I hope is true. And I think it probably is compared to elements of French society and Italian society, things like that. I'm not doing French society or Italian society down, but I think actually there is genuinely quite good integration in the UK. And I hope it's a place of minimal racism. But they don't know this.
Yeah.
It's an assumption.
But I just wonder if it's almost a little bit by design that places like Greece and Italy have these essentially Kafkaesque bureaucracies. You're not meant to be able to navigate it. You know, the intention is to create, to coin a Theresa Mayism, you know, a hostile environment whereby you think, well, actually, yeah, I am going to carry on because I don't want to be. The processing doesn't work. I can't speak to someone in my own language. It's intentionally difficult because they don't want you to settle in Lampedusa or wherever it is that you first make landfall in the European Union.
But for example, there is a fair case made by Greece, Italy, Spain, Bulgaria in that why should we be the bottleneck that processes all asylum cases?
Yep.
And
because this is something that gets talked about in the UK, right? Which is like if a migrant, but when we were within the European Union, if a displaced person arrived on English shores, in theory, we could send them back to Greece, we could send them back to wherever, and that is where their asylum claim would be processed. We're no longer within the European Union. We've Brexited, and therefore it's like, oh, what happens now? And we've got this one in, one out system, right?
Okay, it's interesting you mentioned that, right? Because we were talking to a lot of the migrants there about these policies. The first thing that became clear was that people were aware that the UK pulled out of the Dublin regulation. And in one particular case, one guy said, and I quote, "My main reason for coming to the UK is because I'm protected from deportation because of Dublin," right? And this guy was a 20-year-old guy from Baghdad. His biggest fear was not being deported back to Iraq. It was being deported back to a Bulgarian detention center where he said his conditions were awful. He was sleeping in a courtyard next to like animals that were like using the bathroom next to his head. You know, he said it was awful.
He had to escape from that.
Yeah, he kind of like basically broke out from there. And so that was his biggest fear. And he says, well, I know that Britain's pulled out the Dublin regulation, so they can't deport me back to Bulgaria. And I mean, it's ironic, isn't it? Because one of the main motivations of Brexit was greater border control and greater deterrence from migrants coming to the UK. The other thing was the one in, one out policy. Two people had sort of heard about it, but no one had really understood it. When I was trying to explain it to people, they found it a little bit confusing. I felt that, again, not trying to like tell government how they should like be better, but I felt that if government like advertised this policy on social media, people might understand it a little bit better,
right,
rather than this like very clunky UK government website. These guys aren't going to click on that.
But they are on TikTok.
Yeah. And why wouldn't they advertise? Because some of them were like, oh yeah, I could sign up for that. Tell me more about it. And I was thinking, why aren't the government advertising this on TikTok if you want people to sign up to it?
Also, I think the way people talk about this issue is similar to the way they talked about Brexit back in the day, just in terms of like this very, very complicated cross-border issue. There's all these different legal and humanitarian ramifications. is just not being talked about with the sobriety in an adult way, I think.
Me too. Also, France has asylum hotels. They're just slightly different.
Tell me, explain it.
But I was chatting to a Sudanese migrant who is applying for asylum in Paris. And she said part of the reasons why, when she was in the minority from the people she knew and that she wanted to stay in Paris, but she said that people were under the impression, Sudanese people, that the French system took longer to process your claim. You were given less rights when you're applying for asylum. So, for example, a lot of people in asylum hotels, and it may differ from case to case. They have to. It's like a curfew. You've got to be in at a certain point, out at a certain, or you can go out between like this window of time. That was more restrictive. And she also said that people were under the impression that these asylum centres, or they're not really hotels in France, asylum centres are in like really remote areas. So you can't just walk out and like
they don't give you the money to get back to where you need to go to. So if you have no money, it's very hard to leave. It's just you can't go. Spain and Italy both received more asylum claims than the UK, right? I guess because there's more people moving through it. But this whole thing of like, why don't they claim asylum in the first safe country they arrive at? They do. Like a lot of them do. They don't always. Those claims are mostly rejected, but that's a separate issue. Yeah. I also think like any solution to this has to be diplomatic, right? Like has to be diplomatic in nature. And here's the sort of funny contradiction in the moment we're in now, because any solution to this issue has to be sort of supranational and diplomatic in nature. It kind of means that in this way, the sort of like nationalistic, protectionist, isolationist kind of politics that's arising from the issue is actually antithetical to actually combating the issue itself, and is perpetuating the issue in a way.
But just some of the answers are just maddening sometimes. I mean, people say like, remember we were actually listening to someone calling in on like LBC or something. Actually,
on the way from
and someone's like, just push the deportation button, and I was like, to where? We don't have deportation agreements with any of those 5 countries I mentioned. We don't have one. And someone says, well, just send them back to Iran anyway. And I was like, okay, you want Keir Starmer to call up the Ayatollah, so I'm sorry for like being mean about you for 20 years. Here is 500 billion, and I'll high five the Islamic Republic on Facebook. It's just not going to happen,
sorry
is it?
about the very complex espionage network we operate in your country. Please take all these migrants.
But it's like also when anyone asks the sort of like when anyone says the sort of send them back thing, that's a position you can take, but it has to be followed by the question to where?
To where?
Because you can't just airdrop people into countries.
Let's dial in on this, right? Because we did negotiate a returns agreement with Albania. And it had a dramatic impact on the number of Albanian arrivals arriving into the UK. So in theory then, if we were to strike a deal with the Taliban, if we were to strike a deal with, your man who runs Eritrea, there's a possibility there, isn't there, that we could see a reduction in the numbers?
Well, we could, but I think that raises different issues. I mean, with like, firstly, doing diplomacy with the Taliban, a country where like I don't believe women are allowed to talk to other women in public spaces anymore. How can you legitimately justify sending a woman, back to Afghanistan in that situation? I think, I'm not an expert in Albania, but like Albania is a country where, for the most part, people aren't fleeing for their lives, nor is it a country run by genocidal militias like Sudan. So there's a whole different set of issues with particularly, let's say, for example, countries like Sudan, Afghanistan, Syria as well. So
this is the thing, right? It's because when you listen to the argument you've made, the morality of it, it's striking because of its clarity. It seems quite clear cut. It's like, how do you send someone to those conditions? And the answer is because of hate. If you receive a political mandate, a party of the radical right, a party of the far right, you win an election on a platform of, we are going to deport these people. We are going to send them back to where they go. It's not our responsibility. That's the line. That's the line Farage says, right? It's like, we can't solve every problem in the world.
I agree, but in a Farage-like situation, okay, so let's say Farage was the island in the South Atlantic.
Ascension Islands.
Ascension Islands, right? So let's say you've got 60,000 people coming on small boats a year. We send those people to a compound in this island in the South Pacific, and then people will start realising that, okay, we don't want to come to Britain, but there'll be a lag effect. So then there'll be 30,000, then there'll be 10,000. So then we have 120,000 locked up in an island in the South Pacific with nowhere to immediately send them to. Is that the kind of society we want to be?
Yeah, let's. I think we've been.
I don't want to be the kind of society.
I think we've been
tabling
the moral question. I think it's a good time to maybe bring the morality back in now.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, there's practical issues in terms of reaching returns agreements with various countries, which you have to do if you're going to, quote unquote, send people back. But then there's the moral complicity in telling someone like Mahir, after all that they've been through, this man who wants to become a nurse in the UK and has learned English so that he can come here just by watching his phone, just telling him to fuck off, basically. And I'm sorry, but there is a moral complicity you have in this.